Welcome to the Thought Echoes podcast, where we have an opportunity to listen in as people reflect on their relationship with their thoughts and their creative work and how it's changed since their brain injury. My name is Beth Bonness, host of the Thought Echoes podcast. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this month's interview.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Keefe. I'm an old friend of Beth's from back when she lived in Milwaukee. Isn't that it or no? No, I guess I came out and met you out here. But they had departed Milwaukee and I departed the Midwest, and we ran into each other out here and or out in Portland, Oregon, where I moved at that time. And that was 86, I think. So a few years later, I had to move to California for a job. And so that's still where I am. 22 years later, I'm still in the Los Angeles area.
I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, isn't it wild? It's
Yeah.
like I was born and raised in Chicago, and I lived there till I was 27. So that's the longest, but I'm crowding that one with my residence in California. So when I knew Beth, we were doing some remodeling work on my house and on her house, and so we saw quite a bit of each other for a summer or more, and took some classes from her husband Jeff. So and I know all their daughters. I've seen them since they were little tiny babies. So and then when I went to the job, I went to Southern California for was a residency, a surgical residency. So that took 5 years, and then I stayed down here. I found work in the Los Angeles area. And so that went on for 13 years, the work did. And then our next door neighbors wanted to put a new fence in, and it turned out that they had a deadline to get it in because their son's birthday was coming up, So they hired these guys with a tool belt and a $5,000 bond to put the fence in. And as they went, they were tearing stuff up, and they threw all the garbage over the fence into our yard So I talked with the guy every morning during the period where they were working, and finally my wife met him outside, and she happened to go out there when the neighbor was paying him off, so that she had some extra clout because of that. But anyway, she explained to him that this was not acceptable and he needed to pick out all this junk up. So he said, "Oh, I'll be back here tomorrow to clean up." And I remember then that was Saturday morning, and we got up and I said, "You don't really think this guy's showing up, do you?" Anyhow, so that had us both kind of upset. And about 3 weeks later, Mary's had 3 tires slashed, and they drove nails into a couple of my tires. So I was flipped out about that. And turned out I had already scheduled that day off work, which totally slipped my mind. So I was on my way to work, and I stopped and filled up, the little thing on the dashboard said that my tire needed air. So I stopped and filled that up and everything, and called my office, and they said, "Well, you're not really scheduled to be here." And I was like, so I finally decided I'm not going to go in. So I went to Home Depot on the way home, and I bought a bunch of 8-foot 4x4s and some ready mix, and came over here and sunk those. Also, I put these posts in all along the fence line with cameras up on top of them and stuff. And so I was doing that, and right when I was filling up the car tire with air at that service station, that's when I started getting a bad headache, and it was disabling. It was, didn't feel good. So anyway, I got these cameras up and everything, and then I didn't feel well, so I crashed in bed, and then my wife walked in from work, and so she had to drag me to the hospital, and it was kind of a long, protracted process, but they put me in the hospital the day that I went there, and I stayed in a intensive care unit overnight, and the food was good.
So when you were talking about angry, because, telling the story, you're not exuding the anger that we heard, afterwards. So when the headache started, what kind of a stroke did you have?
It was a hemorrhagic stroke.
Hemorrhagic. So the bleed would have been starting or gotten bad enough that it caused a headache, right? So
Yeah.
Were you still angry? Were you still amped up at that point, or had that kind of resided a little bit?
No, well, no, I was amped up and pissed because I don't have any other enemies that I know about. So I assumed it was these kids who had built the fence that caused all this damage to our cars. So yeah, I was angry about it, and not that I had any great way to manifest that except for sinking 4x4s into
Into the
holes.
ground.
Yeah, so I don't know, but yeah, the other thing that happened is that as we were heading to the hospital, Mary was going to take me to the one closest here. And
Hmm.
I said, no, take me to the one where I work. They know me. They'll take good care of me. And that was a big mistake
Mm.
because once we got there, I realized that it was not like it was one of the feeder hospitals, and the one that's real close to us here
Hmm.
is actually where they take care of stroke patients. So that's eventually where I was shipped the following morning.
Mm.
But I got in there, and this emergency room doctor wouldn't listen to either of us. Mary had three anecdotal experiences of people having ruptured aneurysms and strokes, right in front of her. And this guy was like, well, we practice evidence-based medicine here. And he's getting up on his soapbox and everything. And anyway, it took 5 hours to get a CT scan out of this guy.
Oh, geez.
So that whole time I was just there stewing. And he told I was indicating that the pain was like, behind my eye and up in this part of my head. So he eventually relented and called for an ophthalmology consultation.
Hmm.
And the ophthalmologist was there, and he was like, "Well, you don't have glaucoma or anything." And I said, "Yeah, I know. He already tested me for that." And then, so my wife started talking to him and convinced him to ask for a CT scan of the orbits so we could see if there was something wrong with the eyes.
Hmm.
They did that, and that included enough of the head to realize that there was a big bleed up in that part of my head on the left. So that's when they shipped me to the real hospital.
And then they did surgery?
No, they didn't have to. They watched me. They did serial CT scans, I think, like every 6 or 8 hours.
Hmm.
And they could tell that the bleed had stopped. You know? So they just left me alone. There was only one good story from being in the hospital. There was the first night I was there, this guy showed up who said he was a fellow with the interventional radiology department. And he wanted to know, he said, you need to have a brain angiogram tomorrow. And I came up to talk to you to find out if I could do it. It's like, great. I said, how many have you done? And he said, about 60. And I said, well, and your professor will be there with you the whole time, right? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, that's fine. And then he asked me if I had any questions, and he asked me. Finally, I said, he had like that GQ look where he hadn't shaved in about 3 days. And so I finally said to him, one question, and that's what time of day do you guys shave around here?
Your sense of humor did not go away.
So he got a little flustered by that, but the next morning, oh man, he showed up clean shaved.
All clean shaven. Oh, that's funny. So you were in you took off of work then for a chunk of time, and what kind of rehab did you go through?
Well, I was only in the hospital for a few days. Once they were sure the bleeding had stopped, they set me up to have a repeat angiogram done outpatient like a month later,
Hmm.
and they scheduled a repeat MRI and stuff. So I did most of the rest of it from just being at home.
Right,
And
yeah.
they
I did
really
the same thing.
well, they set me up for outpatient physical therapy, so I did some of that.
Hmm.
I was unimpressed, but it was okay. And so
So
that
go
was
ahead.
pretty much it. I had some testing done about 6 months later because we got into a horrible car accident, and they wanted a neuropsychologist to test me. And it wasn't all. I was with them 8 hours. It was just horrific.
Yeah. And
And
then
then and that was 2015, April of 2015. And then I had this other stroke on my birthday, January 12th this year, and it was another bad one. But I was watching TV, and I was at our other house in Ventura, and I called Mary on the phone, and I was just joking around with her something that I saw on the TV, and she thought I didn't sound right. But she didn't come get me right then or anything. She called me in the morning, and I wasn't making any sense, so she called 911 to have somebody come get me. So that one, I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember the guys coming in the house. They carted me off on a stretcher and all that kind of stuff. But
Was that another hemorrhagic stroke?
it was. So the
Was.
first one was here, the second one was here.
So both sides of your brain.
Yeah.
Jeez. And that ironically was the day before, I think I was supposed to interview you for this podcast, and you were off having another stroke, which was awful.
Very,
Awful.
very inconvenient of me.
Very. Well, I'm very glad. That's why I really wanted to make sure that, when you were ready, that we did get back together and talk. So the nature of these podcasts, because there are other stroke podcasts that go through, I'll say the more medical and rehab side of it. The piece that has fascinated me since I had my strokes and kind of everything slowed down, the thoughts. In my case, I wasn't able to I had some aphasia, so I wasn't able to talk for a while. And outside, I mean, in my head, I was talking plenty, but I wasn't able to get the words out.
Good
And
thing
so
I'm telepathic and everything like that. Right?
oh, there you go. And so I've been fascinated with that sense of there was an essence of me that was still the same, even though I couldn't talk like I would normally talk. But that sense of who I was still there, behind the scenes. And so I've just been fascinated to talk to other people, especially who are writers and musicians who spend some time and creative cycles where it's a different space you're kind of in when you're creating. And so I was interested with you're a jazz musician. And so improv is a big piece of jazz. And so I was really curious how, if you can, talk a little bit about your involvement, what kind of music experience you were having, and then how that may have changed over the course, either during your recovery or now, because you're starting to buy some beautiful instruments, and spend more time on it.
Play them is the question. But anyway, yeah, I started playing the guitar when I was about 14. My brother went off to college and I started high school. And so he'd come home most weekends and he always knew a few new tunes he picked up from guys in the dormitory and all that. So anyway, he schooled me on everything he was picking up, and it was great because I made a lot of progress. And then my folks paid for me to have lessons with the guy at a local music store. He was a pretty good player, so it wasn't 100% positive experience, but it was good. And I actually ran into him years and years later at one of my brother's weddings.
Mm.
He was a guitarist in the orchestra that was singing for the wedding. It's pretty good. But anyway, so I was pretty serious about guitar back then. And I think coming out of high school, there was a guy who played guitar with the jazz band in our high school, and his dad was a guitar player, and he had like a wedding band. So it was guitar, Cordovox, which is an electronic accordion,
Mm-hmm.
Almost like an organ sound. It's pretty good, So guitar, Cordovox, and drums. And God, I'm trying to remember his name, the guy that was my age, but he played drums in his dad's band, but he was a good enough guitarist to make it into the jazz band at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't remember why I brought all that up.
Well, you're just giving the background. So, I know you had done some recording years ago.
Yeah.
And so that was cool. And I know you were a doctor, you're busy. So the time that you've been able to spend on music has morphed with, the time raising the kids and all that, but you had gotten into it again. And so if you can think about the time when you were, doing that recording in terms of how your interaction with your music practice may have changed between then and now, other than we're all older,
The
so.
first thing that I recorded was something about the what the heck was the thing name? But it was about the improvement in the economy in Ireland to the point where they were hiring English people to come work in the factories in Ireland, So there was a New York Times article on the Celtic tiger, and it was, that was a phenomenon where their economy was so great that the Celts had the tiger going for them, And it was, it was like the lyrics to a tune, the way it was written. So I just made a tune out of it and recorded it. And it was fun to do, and I plagiarized some poetry from what's his name, Yeats.
Hmm.
And
Probably in the public domain now, so it's okay.
oh yeah, it's been a long time. Let me think of the thing. Being Irish, oh heck, I'd have to go grab the book. He had us. Oh, I can't remember. He had something like he was skeptical to a fault. Uh,
And so you use some of that poetry in the piece?
yeah, right. And oh, I can't remember exactly. But being Irish, he was miserable enough so that it made pleasurable times look pleasurable or something. It was like so that, and then I had another tune that I'd written at that point I recorded, but then I didn't really do any of that for a long time. And I try to play music most days. I have a couple of guitars around and a piccolo and a saxophone and a double bass. And so there's lots of opportunity to just pick something up and start playing.
How did that feel after you had the strokes? Because once you were going to take time off of work, so your therapy was just moving around the cabin, so to speak. And
Yeah.
so I remember Mary trying to encourage you to spend more time with your music because now you had some time, some extra time. And so how did it feel doing that? I mean, with your brain, cognitively, there's kind of during recovery, there's a little bit of a lag and a delay and stuff. And I wonder if that translated into the work you did with music, or somehow those parts of your brain didn't have that same lag.
I was lucky in that I wasn't paralyzed at all, because it wasn't an embolic stroke. And so it was it was just in the parenchyma of the brain in the frontal lobe on the left side. The whole frontal lobe is just a scar at this point. It's not really functioning. They said that I would lose my executive function because of that. So then the guy, as soon as he said that, he turned to Mary and he said, "That means he can't control road rage." And she's like, "Oh, he's not very good at that now." So anyway, I got home and everything was pretty normal. I was getting around okay and everything, but the times that I sat down and tried to play the guitar, I had difficulty. It wasn't that I was paralyzed, but just the patterns of movement, the shapes of chords and stuff, you got them in your head and you go to grab them and it's grabbing something different. So that was happening. And so there was a period of about 2 weeks of just playing enough chords and scales and exercises and arpeggios and all that kind of stuff until things got back to normal. But thankfully it did. And with this one, the stroke that I had in January, I was in an ICU for a while, then in a step-down unit, and then they shipped me to a rehab hospital. There I had speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. There were like every day I had like 6 or 7 appointments with all these therapists. And uniformly, they just walk in, they say, "Oh, feel like taking a walk?" That was the therapy.
Oh, geez.
So anyhow, I did that, and I was in that hospital about a solid week, maybe 8 days, I can't remember. But altogether, it was I think it was 5 weeks in the hospital. Man, that's a long period of time.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
So did you play any music when you were in the hospital, or that waited until you came back?
Yeah, I did actually, because the speech therapist was also involved in like evaluating my cognitive ability. So she's sitting there with a computer with me, and we were together about 40 minutes or so. And at the end of it, she said, "I'm sorry to say that you're neglecting all input from your left visual field." And I was like, "No, I'm not. I was here with you those 40 minutes. I'm not neglecting anything." And then she said, "And you're not using your left hand as well as your right hand." And so all of a sudden, all these, this cavalcade of therapists are coming through the room. They're all coming in saying, "Well, I see you're moving your left hand. Good, bully for you," and that kind of stuff. So anyway, there was a young nurse that was very nice with us, nice to us, and all that. And so she is interested in starting to learn to play guitar. So I was talking to her about that, and anyway, then with all this BS about how I wasn't moving my left hand, I told Mary, bring a guitar in here. So I got the young nurse crying. But it was good. So I realized then that my hands were better than they were after the first stroke.
Good. And so what kind of music have you been playing?
Well, as you noted, I purchased a new instrument, this double bass that I bought as a new instrument. And so I'm taking lessons from a guy who's, a pretty proficient player.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to get my act together on that a little bit, trying to play some music with it, which is not a foregone conclusion. It's a whole different animal than a bass guitar. But it's, so I'm doing that, and I still play guitar probably 2 or 3 times a week, and try and play the bass every day.
So are you still, when you're practicing, I'm curious in the, as I've been, kind of dipping my toe more into improvisation in general. And so you've got jazz improvisation, comes up first, and then comedy acts, improv, comes up second. But the thing that fascinated me was that the science, and I can't remember the guy's name, I'll look it up while I'm here because I made a note of it, that he is a neurologist and a surgeon, and he was fascinated about creativity in music. And so in trying to study jazz musicians in an fMRI, in terms of how they learn a bass and then they improvise it and whatnot, and then get that. Now you're laying on your back with this, it's not conducive to what their normal environment is, but just finding that parts of the brain light up, the ones that kind of make the decisions and are the traffic cop. That's not the technical term, but those get kind of shut down, and the ones that just want to play figuratively and physically are lit up. And so I was just thinking from your perspective that allowing that improvisation brain to do its thing, since you'd already played in that sandbox, so to speak, because you did improv, jazz improv before, that I wondered how it felt doing that now.
It's a strange thing. I mean, language is, pardon me, music is a language unto itself, And so when you spend a lot of time, practicing, jazz licks and recording solos from great players that you're following and that kind of stuff, you kind of learn their language and their use of certain, the way they'll frame an arpeggio of a chord or something like that. You kind of learn those things, and that becomes part of the language that you understand and that you're hearing when you're listening to somebody play, So that's still sort of there, and it comes down to licks almost because, I could specify particular licks, but the way I heard them before, I still hear them and I still try and go for them, So that's pretty much the same. And then I didn't mention that I had another whole recording session where I spent 3 days with a guy in his studio, and I think the first day I was there with him, we kind of went over what the possibilities were, and then he said, well, I've got some backup musicians I could call and hire them to come put some tracks down. So we hired a pianist, a drummer, and a bass player. So they came and we laid down basically rhythm section tracks for the 2 tunes I was recording. And then I came back and put in the vocals and the guitar solos and stuff at a separate session. So I was there 3 days with the guy. And I couldn't afford to be there one day, so that was but it was fun. And one of the tunes was an ode to my son who passed away about,
That was a beautiful song.
2005 or something like that. I can't remember. But
do you have that song up on the internet somehow, or is that just the DVDs we got?
The only place it's currently located is Spotify. You have to look under artist, and it's Michael William Keefe.
Okay. Well, I'll do that and get the link and add that to the podcast info. Cool. It's a beautiful song.
So there's that one, and then there's a love song. Makes me laugh.
Why does the love song make you laugh?
It's a love song written from the perspective of someone who's a sports nut. And I wrote it for my sister-in-law has a blues band in Chicago. And so I was trying to write something that she would play. And she's never gotten interested. So once she heard my recording of it, she's like, I got to learn that song. I was like, I know. I wrote it for you.
That's a
So,
great story. That's a great story.
yeah, so that's good. And so it's mostly at this point guitar and bass that I'm playing now.
And so how often are you taking those lessons with the person with the
He,
new?
he actually comes here, which is
Oh, nice.
extraordinary. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I see him every Friday, and so he doesn't have to haul anything. I've got an instrument, a bow, and all that. So
Mm.
if he's demonstrating something to me, he'll just do it with
Mhm.
myself.
So do you have any ideas for recording after you learn this new instrument?
Well, yeah, definitely. That's a great idea. I'm kind of shoveling out the cellar. We have a semi-finished cellar here, but it's got a low ceiling. It's like,
Oh,
6'6" on one side and less than that, 6'3" on the other side. So when my son walks in there, his
oh, Brandon.
head is right against the
Oh.
ceiling.
But that'd be a recording studio?
Well, I mean,
Practice?
it's a soundproofed room and everything. So yeah, and I've got the equipment I need. I just need to get organized, and I've taken several classes at UCLA learning to try to use all this equipment. And
Mhm.
the environment you record in is a software package basically. And
Mm.
if you do it every day, I imagine it's not a big deal. But if you do it once in 6 months, you have to start over again
Yeah,
and teach yourself the beginnings every time. So that's
that's
frustrating.
that's good for
Down there would be
neuroplasticity.
good. And then I know a guy who he rented out like an old warehouse space in Panorama City, which is where the hospital was that I worked
Mm.
last. And he basically, built another room within each of the rooms, so they're all soundproof to the max and stuff. So, and he's got good equipment. So I need to make a few calls to figure out who he is again, though. It's been a
Mhm.
while. That was an
So,
exciting day in terms of music for me. It was my 60th birthday. Unfortunately, we had this young friend in town who was a promising composer, and he was managing to get soundtracks for TV shows and stuff. So he was doing well for himself. But he was uh, you know, a friend of Vince Vaughn's. So Vince Vaughn apparently lives in Chicago, and every once in a while he puts a call out to all his boys, and they get together for a little revelry for a week.
oh,
So unfortunately, our friend reveled to the point where he was dead afterwards.
oh,
Well, don't know how that could have happened. We were just drinking water and 7-Up. Okay, Vince, let me watch your next sophomoric movie.
mm,
But anyway, our friend passed away, and it was quite tragic.
sorry.
But in the process of just hanging out with him a little bit, I got to see his studio space, and you know, I have some idea how it could happen. But basically, I mean, I've paid a lot of money for music lessons over the years, but now I can pay some money to have somebody teach me
Mhm.
how to deal with Logic or one of these software environments.
Right. And will you do the same thing again where you lay down different tracks, or will you get with some other musicians and kind of do something together again?
Yeah, the second version would be a great idea. It would be nice to have some people to play with. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, the convenience of having this guy at one of the little studio call 3 people, they showed up. They're all great players. With one try, we laid down tracks for both of them. So
Wow.
it was good.
That would be fun. That would be fun. So if you could go back, now I'm switching lanes to the stroke specifically. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give to an earlier version of you in terms of before the strokes and life now?
It's interesting because I've had 2 hemorrhagic strokes affecting, at least symmetrical parts of the brain and all that, but it's been a very different experience each time. And the stroke in 2015, I was really pretty incapacitated for probably 6 months.
Mhm.
Did a lot of time staring at the wall,
Mm.
staring at paintings. And my daughter, who was a former dancer and a former Pilates instructor, just kind of sat in front of me one day and said, "Dad, you got to start doing something. You can't just keep staring at the wall." So she got me set up with a Pilates teacher, and that's been a great relationship and just a great outlet and
Mm-hmm.
way to stay sort of toned up. And
Good.
yeah, so
Good.
she's currently the other woman, but I have to watch what I do with the other women.
Which leads me to the next question, which is what advice would you give to caregivers, spouses, and the teams that work with people who have had strokes or other brain injuries? What advice would you give them in hindsight after what your experience was?
I just think positivity was the biggest thing that helped me out. It was nice to have, my kids live in the Bay Area and in Portland, Oregon, so it was really nice to have them kind of just drop everything and come down and help Mary for a few days. So that made a lot of difference. So between them and the positive experiences with therapists in the rehab center, it was good. By the time I got home, I felt okay.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you want to share that we didn't cover?
Well, I think, one of the things that's been difficult for me is we were trying to line up some in-home care for me to begin when Mary was going to have to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a bit of a challenge. It turned out that there was a sweet little Filipino woman who cared for my mother when she was declining. And so my sister happened to still have her number. So she called her. And
Oh.
so she had a niece and the niece's husband who lived out here and who were doing that kind of work. So we tried working with them. We had 3 or 4 different companies come through and talk to it. I don't feel like there were scammers by any means, but I don't know. I mean, how much can you offer somebody else? You can make sure they don't fall down, I guess.
Yeah. And it was just a matter of time that you just had to kind of do your PT exercises and let your body heal before.
Yeah, that's true. And it hasn't finished yet.
Well, I don't think any of us ever. I mean, as long as we're alive, we're working on something.
Yeah, but like when you were saying before, things had slowed down and stuff like that. I was watching you from the outside, and it was obvious that things had slowed down, and they've picked back up again. By the way, you're looking
good. Good.
So I think whether it's family that's going to help you or whether you're hiring people to help you, that's one point where you have to be assertive and cautious.
Yeah.
Because people
and allowing the help, because I mean you've been very independent and acknowledging that for a period of time you need some extra help is kind of a little bit of I get that. So
it's difficult to do. Yeah, I mean, like
yeah.
why would I want to pay somebody to do what I can already do? Mary, well, you can't do that. You'll fall in the pool or whatever.
He's just looking out for you.
Yeah. Yeah, in that regard, I'm very, very lucky that I have somebody who's so devoted. And
she loves you. A lot of people love you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear. I'll post the song, and then when you get the next one recorded, I can always go and update the podcast with the latest recording.
All right, that sounds good.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike, for taking the time.
Oh, you're welcome. Great to see you.
Say hi to Mary. Jeff says hi.
Oh, okay. Same way. Yeah, good.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me this month. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends, leave a comment, and subscribe. Until next month, take a moment and hug someone you love.